it's a different world.
Right, welcome everyone. Glad you're able to join us and that you showed the wisdom to come into the air conditioning. Today we're really pleased to have Bryan Smith with us. He's the co-founder of the Orthodox Christian School Foundation. He is a consultant and his work is a lot about the intersection of Orthodox Christianity and classical methods and classical education. And so we're really happy to have him talk to us about that today. Yesterday we were able to spend the whole day with Bryan and he was able to consult with us on our school project, which was really helpful. He helped us to begin to understand the things that we don't understand and to begin to solve some of the issues that we have with the school. So the issues are relatively small, but we were able to work on those. So, right, without further ado, I want to turn over the microphone to Bryan Smith. So Bryan, welcome to St. Vladimir's and thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you, Father. You got me? Well, thank you, Father. And blessed feast. Happy to be here with you all on your patronal feast day. These days are always occasions of memory when the church guides us in remembering who we are, of what we are capable, and of our proper ends as humans and as Christians. And consequently, we are reminded by the lives of the saints, and especially on these memorial days, of the most important human endeavors. Such memories inspire our own poetic understandings of the world, and they create culture. So I'm here to talk about one of the primary ways that we pass memory down to other generations, which is education. Years ago, I was blessed to help found an Orthodox Christian school. I served as its headmaster for 5 years. Startups are always hard, but when you are in that first year with those children in the seats, and they are engaged in the lessons and engaged with their friends and engaged with you, it's really a beautiful thing. When you labor and you struggle and you argue and you encounter problems and you find workarounds and you just want to tear your hair out, there's always the day when the children are in the desks and when the children are looking up at you with those big eyes and asking you real questions, and you remember why you did all of this. So it's truly it's been a great blessing to be involved in that kind of project, in spite of all of the struggles. I don't know if anything really good is done without struggle and hard work. During the time that I was there, we hosted the first nationwide conference of Orthodox schools, and that resulted in the formation of the Orthodox Christian School Association. We just advertised. We didn't even know if anybody was out there. We didn't know if it was just going to come back like an echo. But we discovered other people were trying to start Orthodox schools, and they actually showed up, and we met each other. So we collected names, started a website, and formed the Orthodox School Association. We were hoping that would become a way to share resources, just to create a network. We created a startup handbook. We started consulting together on accreditation standards and this kind of work that we thought might help people running schools, starting schools, to leverage the experience of others and not have everybody starting from scratch. I currently work with private classical schools and with the Orthodox School Association. In the Assembly of Bishops, the Orthodox School Association is under the Committee for Youth, which is under Bishop Thomas of the Antiochian Archdiocese, and he sends his greetings. Yesterday, of course, we had the pleasure of meeting with members of this local parish and another parish who are leading this effort to start an Orthodox school here. And so I'm going to talk a bit about the classical nature of education in an Orthodox context, and perhaps some things about a broader vision for Orthodox schools in America. John Chrysostom said, having children is a matter of nature, but raising them and educating them in the virtues is a matter of mind and will. There is an obligation which begins with parents, but it's shared by family and by the church to give young people the knowledge and the habits and the inclinations that will make them good citizens, good community members, but also help them understand what it means to be made in the image of God. This is the important work, I think, that Orthodox Christian schools can and do perform. And there's an opportunity for schools to harmonize with the church, with local churches, in encouraging our children on their way up that ladder of spiritual growth that leads to the noblest end that we would call theosis, or life in God. Schools can never claim the work of the church, the clergy, or a child's spiritual father for the school, for teachers and educators, but our schools can harmonize with the church in this soul-guiding effort. Now, there's a complication in our historical context. We live in a country and in a time that has seen almost a century now of conflicting versions of education arising from conflicting understandings of human nature, human potential, and the proper ends of human society. Most recently, we see emerging a very intentional social and psychological curriculum that separates students from the lessons of the past and from traditional communities, which acknowledges no authority beyond one's own private inclinations, and which teaches the children that there are no boundaries they may not transgress, either in thought, behavior, or even biology. Some very fundamental arguments will be playing themselves out about human nature and human society over the next few years in the press, in the political arena, in the courts, and in that theater of the furies, social media. In the meantime, parents have the very practical issue of sending their children day in and day out to have their minds and affections formed by someone. But by whom? And this is the great issue about the need for schools. So, there's a beautiful and a frightening image that is one of the paradigms of education. It was given to us many years ago, centuries ago, over 2 millennia ago, by Plato. He says this: imagine a group of people who are in a cave, and they're chained facing a wall opposite the entrance of the cave. Imagine they've been there all their lives. All they see is the wall of the cave. On this wall are reflections, shadows of images, trees, animals, and people projected there from someone behind them, and they never see the person. This is all they see. If those images are all they ever see, they mistake, he says, these shadow images for reality. And the false show, the false interpretation of life and of their condition, keeps them content in their condition of bondage. But now, he says, imagine a man coming down to these prisoners and trying to convince them that the images are false. These images are all they know. Trying to convince them that those images are false and that there are real things to see. They won't believe him, Plato says. He may in fact need to unbind one of the prisoners, turn him around, perhaps compel him to walk up to the entrance, to walk outside, to endure the brightness of the light, lift his eyes and look at real things. Having done this, he will never again mistake those shadowed trees and horses and people for real trees and horses and people. And outside the cave, this liberated man will also see that everything he sees is made visible by the sun. Now, this journey from bondage and false images to freedom and reality and the source of light, this, Plato says, is education. The origin of the word education, educare, is to lead out. So education in this sense is much broader than mere training or imparting of mere knowledge or indoctrinating. It is liberation from falsehood about our condition, about our nature, and about our potential. Now, traditionally, the arts, it was viewed that there were arts needed to free us from falsehood and foolishness. And these arts traditionally have been called the liberal arts, the arts that liberate. I was once talking about the liberal arts at the opening of a school many years ago in Keller, Texas. There was a boy sitting with his dad in the front row and kept saying the liberal arts, and I heard the little boy one time, he looked over at his dad and said, "Is this guy liberal?" But it means the arts that liberate. This understanding of education by which the Cappadocians, well, let me back up just a minute. I gave you Plato's image of the cave, culminating in the fact that outside the cave, the liberated person can see real things and ultimately see the sun. Well, the Cappadocians, St. Basil, St. Macrina, the Gregories, those builders of early Christian community, they incorporated this image into their own conversation about education as they were building a Christian society. However, they elaborated it and said that in that image, the sun, which makes everything else visible and everything else makes sense, that the sun is Christ. In thy light shall we see light, as the psalm says. This understanding of education as turning, as liberation, which requires arts which free you, this understanding of education, which the Cappadocians and others built a Christian culture, is the understanding that animates the philosophy that's behind this school project in your own community. And also others in the Orthodox Church today. We need people teaching our children who will guide them toward truth, helping them to awaken the nous, to build their intellects and to form their proper affections, to come out of the caves of our time. This need is what led Christians throughout the centuries to establish schools that they deemed compatible with the proper formation of young people, and it's this same hope that's moving more and more Orthodox families and parishes around the country to start schools today. Here's a list of principles that from the teachings of the Church, which should inform our educational goals and practices. One, that humans are united in one common nature, all being made in the image of God, all being addressed by the eternal Logos, all having free will. Secondly, truth is rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. Truth is not merely propositional. It's not a matter of just getting your syllogisms all in a row. But statements about real things can be true and false, and language is crucial to keeping our thoughts in line with the nature of things. But truth is rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. 3, the Incarnation teaches us that the physical world must also be our concern. We can understand the physical world, we can appreciate it, and we can sanctify it. 4, our souls are complex, and they can be properly or improperly ordered. Proper ordering of the soul calls for awakening the nous, building up the intellect, training the emotions, redirecting the desires. You've encountered this project if you've read very much at all of the Philokalia. 5th, I have here, we are persons, not individuals. We are made in the image of God, God who is a trinity of persons. We are persons, not individuals, and we are meant to find our fulfillment in community. These are five principles that I think an Orthodox Christian philosophy of education should flow from. By contrast, however, the prevailing educational dogmas teach children that there is no nature to be followed and perfected, but rather identities to be chosen and asserted. They are given no hope of ultimate truth, but a myriad of facts from which they are asked to construct their own realities. In a perfectly Gnostic dualism, they're taught that nature is either a kind of goddess to be mindlessly worshipped, or a mine of physical resources to be ravaged. And whatever disorder they may encounter in themselves, they are encouraged either to pathologize or legitimize. And rather than understanding themselves as persons born to connect and to belong, they're taught the myth of individuality, which allows them, like stray sheep, to be the prey to all of the wolves of our times. An Orthodox school should be a place that is not like the common culture. You know, you could take a picture of any group of Orthodox clergy and put it in black and white and put it up against any other picture of Orthodox clergy from 200 or 400 years ago, and you couldn't really tell what century we're in. That's a superficial example, but in more fundamental ways, the Orthodox world is transmitting permanent things, and an Orthodox school should be transmitting permanent things, which means it will not be like the popular culture. It doesn't mirror the trends and the celebrities of the moment, and it gives young people space to step away from that dying world into the enduring things of human life, into the something, the old abiding truths, the ages of ages. It should be a place where children are not distracted, fragmented, and merely entertained, but taught to attend. Today, there are about 60 Orthodox Christian schools in the country. I know of 5 current projects to start new schools in 4 different states. The more recently established schools have this identity of a classical school. St. John's in San Francisco, Christ the Savior Academy in Wichita, St. John Academy in Houston, Hagia Sophia. The classical aspect of an Orthodox school is significant cause for some explanation. I'm going to paraphrase some of the language off your Ann Arbor Orthodox School website. And then I'll run off into other things. But paraphrasing, education in the classical sense is the proper formation of the human soul and mind through coming to know what is true and good in order that the student might do good and live according to the truth. Classical schooling cooperates with church and family by giving particular attention to the right ordering of the student's mind and soul, cultivated for the growth of virtue. The liberal arts, classical education, you will sometimes hear classical education, you will sometimes hear liberal arts, and they are really part of the same approach to education. Classical tends to relate to content. The liberal arts tend to relate to a focus on formation. The liberal arts are those essential tools a free person must have to become a full and positive member of society, typically defined as 7, grammar, logic, and rhetoric being the arts of language and clarity of thought, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, thought of as arts of number, space, and movement. Now, this is an old formulation of these two important realms of language and quantity. And because this is a tradition of educational practice, it adapts and it grows. But you can see that from the start, this form of education promotes facility both in language arts and in mathematical arts. Now, the classical content refers to the traditional works of literature, history, philosophy, theology, science, politics that embody perennial truths and insights. The classics are admired not because they're old. They tend to be old, but that's not why they are admired and transmitted. They're old because they've lasted. They're old because they have spoken to people of many eras, many cultures, many tongues, and they continue to be relevant to folks. And that's why they still exist. Therefore, so many of them are old. They provide the most thoughtful reflections on the meaning and potential of human life, and they introduce students into a conversation which spans centuries and millennia. This is huge for kids because it pulls them out of themselves, it pulls them out of their peer thought world. It frees young people from the tyranny of fads, tribes, and the cult of mediocrity. Let me give a few concrete examples of what a student might do in a classical school. And of course, I'm thinking of an Orthodox classical school. Students in a classical school will study the technicalities of every subject and every art that they're being asked to learn as they go toward enjoying the subject as a whole. For example, students in a classical school will study phonics. They will learn spelling rules. Nobody just wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I want to go learn 5 more spelling rules. Nobody who wants to play the piano probably wakes up and says, can I practice my scales? There's another goal in mind, but they will learn these technicalities of the language arts. They will memorize poems and prose passages from traditional literature that affirms goodness and nobility in human action. They'll learn to control their hands with penmanship, to control their speech with grammar and grace, and to control their minds with logic, attention, contemplation, and prayer. Students in a classical school will study grammar, logic, and rhetoric to master the forms of language in a variety of genres, to sort sense from nonsense, in the structure of arguments, and to use language in compelling ways by applying argument, arrangement, and style. They will cultivate number sense and learn math not merely as a tool for practical matters, but also as a testimony to the harmonies of God's world and as evidence that there are truths that are timeless and not of our own making. They study classical languages, like Greek, Latin, in order to understand the structures of language and secure linguistic foundation in the Romance languages, but also to open to them direct access to such significant authors as Homer, Plato, and Virgil, as well as the sacred works of the New Testament, the Divine Liturgy, and the writings of the Church Fathers in the original. Older students will read difficult but rewarding texts from authors from Homer to Dostoevsky. And what do they do with these? The pedagogy tends to have the students read and not merely face an exposition of it, but to discuss these things, to interpret, to argue with grace. Please let us teach more people to argue with grace, and to write about these things with clarity. Children will learn about the physical world, the creation, neither as an occasion for the latest political agenda, nor as a mine of resources to be consumed upon our lusts, but rather as a reverent study of the intricate and artistic creation of God, which embodies his creative energies and is ordered by the divine Logos. As Orthodox Christians, we don't only have a different theology, I think we have a different physics than the West. Older students are led into the subtleties of the methods of scientific inquiry by also learning about the means of interpreting scientific observations. They read the seminal writings of scientific thinkers and see how the great men and women of science reasoned to their conclusions, while also getting the important concepts in the actual words of those who formulated them. I've been in a school where students in middle school were reciting Newton's laws of motion in Latin, which they understood. This invites the students into the ongoing conversation on nature, on the nature of the physical world, and it helps them see the insights of the empirical sciences not as a body of dogma. Now, often in a lot of schools, science today is taught as catechism. Here are some questions, here are the truths, learn it, spit it back to me. But this is, but the insights of the empirical sciences are a heritage of shared wisdom. And the children can be led to participate in that, to see it in that way, and to appreciate it in that way. Many classical schools take a slower initial approach to the teaching of math concepts because they want students to cultivate mathematical thinking and not merely learn to manipulate functions. Many have students, as they get a little older, work through Euclidean proofs, which, algebra in a way is, the difference between algebra and, say, the Euclidean form of geometry has been described as this. One is hiking over a mountain and it's hard, it's difficult, it takes a long time, and you see everything. And the other, meaning algebra, is like a tunnel through the mountain. You go through quickly, efficiently, and in darkness. It has its place, obviously, and we want students to learn it. But there's a pedagogical reason for having students take a hard way of learning that shows them more about what they're studying. so that they get insights and not merely efficiency. Many classical schools, also with that Euclidean approach, students are asked to understand and articulate these geometric problems and insights, not with diagrams, but with language. If you've ever been in a classroom full of students and you're presenting something and you say, I had this experience where you say, does everybody understand? You know what you get? All the heads nod. And then you say, okay, tell me how it works. You, tell me how it works. If somebody can't put it into words that another person can understand, they probably don't understand. In summary, students in a classical school should acquire not just some dogmas, not just a bunch of facts, but the tools of learning. The tools of learning in the realms of literacy and numeracy, so that they are not merely indoctrinated, but rather liberated from groupthink, from bias, and from foolishness. They will learn to disagree agreeably. They learn to prioritize perennial truths over popular opinions. They become familiar, even intimate, with ideas that have power to move people and nations, with the civilization that is their heritage, and with the church, which is their home and their hope. I want to emphasize that classical education, the liberal arts approach to education is not a new thing in the Orthodox world. It's not a new thing to the Orthodox Church. At the very dawn of the Christian era, St. Justin, the philosopher and martyr, said, whatever has been spoken aright by any man in any place in any age belongs to Christians. Because, that's the end of the quote, because all men were made in the image of God, all humans made in the image of God, because that image is not eradicated by the fall, all humans at all times have operated with a soul made for and responding to the divine Logos. Though men can ignore the Logos, even rebel against it, when they have been attentive and obedient, it has spoken through them. And those of us blessed by revelation, by history, by tradition, can still hear and profit from it. St. John of Damascus said, we pile up the pure currency like bankers, and we reject the counterfeit. The close attention to the use of language, which is characteristic of a classical education, can be understood in one assertion by St. Basil that I really like. He said, we cannot become like God without knowledge of Him. And without lessons, there can be no knowledge. Now, instruction begins with proper use of speech. Syllables and words are the elements of speech. Consequently, to scrutinize syllables is not a superfluous task. Yes. If you don't pay attention to your syllables, it might hinder your knowledge of God. St. Basil says, making what could seem like the superficial grammatical study very profound. There are many wonderful passages where, St. Basil writes to a lot of his former schoolmates and former students, and he's often correcting them about this or that. But there's one where he's criticizing a former student wrote to him, and he's criticizing his handwriting. He says, write straight, make your lines straight. You're going wobbly and sideways like the crab in the Aesop story. So he was always the teacher. Had the early Christians wished to jettison all of the works of the classical tradition, pedagogies from the rhetoric of Greece and Rome, they had a perfect opportunity when the Emperor Julian banned Christians in the 4th century from teaching in the schools. Watch out, we may, see a similar edict in our time. Julian died young, however, and Christians returned to those methods of classical and liberal arts education. They were, however, very selective in their use of the works of antiquity and made additions to those. They baptized the project in creating what we today call classical education. The early Christian scholars added authors of their own to their school anthologies, to the standard school collection of speeches by famous Greek orators. They added these 5 speeches by Gregory Nazianzus on the Trinity, the 5 theological orations. And because these were used in schools, they copied them over and over and over. And there's a huge manuscript tradition of these speeches so that the students could have them and so that we could have them. So what we call classical tradition today really does come to us through a Christian filter. Through Christian hands that work them together with the fuller understanding of Revelation into a unified sacrament of the intellect. The great works are truly the remnants of school practice in Byzantium. You walk into Barnes & Noble and you go to the classics section, you see the books there. You're really looking at the remnants of school practice in Byzantium. We could say that classical education was invented by Christian scholars, by Christian saints, by churchmen, whose belief in the unity of all mankind through shared image of God led them to believe in one fixed human nature. Their belief in the eternal Logos, that the eternal Logos worked in all men, led them to have a respect to any who demonstrated a faithfulness to that Logos. And in their minds, the need for such a faithfulness required, above all, integrity to language. This is the educational philosophy and practice which motivates the project here in your parish. It's a form of schooling consistent with the faith of the church. It's growing in attention and popularity across this country due to some measurable and demonstrable success in student achievement, college placement, and things like this, but also because of the good, wholesome, and civil student culture that is so often an important part of these schools. I believe that we in the Orthodox Church have the opportunity to become a new school option for Americans who are looking for solid academics, character formation, traditional Christianity. And from such a position, we have a real potential to influence our society by sending into the professions and vocations of our country young men and women who've been formed and nurtured in the rich soil of the Orthodox faith for so many years. We do hold something concrete and precious to pass on to another generation of Americans. We have something true, unchanging, life-giving to impart to a nation that is rich in goodwill, but impoverished by materialism. Schools like the one that you and your friends are contemplating, planning, and working for here are one of the ways that we can leaven the lump of our society. So I urge you all to support this effort with your prayers, your wisdom and your experience, as well as your resources for the glory of God and for the sanctity of us all. So thank you very much.
We have time for questions if you're willing to let people ask.
Yes?
If there are any. Does anyone like to ask a question?
Actually, I do. This strikes me as being and you've emphasized this, a very language-oriented program. And what happens with kids who are intrinsically less verbal? And we see this all the time. There's a spectrum. It's not like I'm talking about handicapped children or dyslexic kids or something, just kids who are intrinsically less verbal. If I plug myself into what you describe, I would flunk out. And I went to a Seven Sisters college. So, there is, you say that even mathematics has to be communicated verbally. But again, some people don't communicate well that way, and probably never will.
I think it would be unrealistic to think that all humans would function in the very same way and the very same level at almost anything. However, language is something that is so core to us as humans. It's so important to us in terms of not just communication, not just saying I need a glass of milk, but in terms of sharing our thoughts, getting hearing the thoughts of others, understanding what's being said. Our thoughts are so related to language. Not to help children become better at something that they might not be naturally good at, I think is really detrimental and negligent. Let me say this. Some aspects of language are natural. Language is an interesting thing. It's rooted in something natural. All children will learn to speak, barring some disability, all children will learn to speak when they're around people who are speaking. But, and they will intuit a system of grammar, but not all children will learn to write. Because writing is not natural in the way that speaking is. Language has these layers from natural to artistic. Arts have to be taught. They have to be taught according to their technicalities. And even children who don't seem to have a natural facility in language, if they are put in a language-rich program, they will learn so much more about grammar, they will learn so much more vocabulary. If we say, you're not good at this, therefore you don't have to do it, I know that, I'm sorry, I created a false dilemma here. but my point is that we can never expect all humans to be at the same place. We have to accept this kind of variety in human society, in human communities. But something as crucial as language, we have to build children up in their facility in this. Even if you think about the visual arts, we often think, this is an art kid, he's a visual spatial kid, and yet try to have an art class where somebody doesn't speak in expository paragraphs to the children to tell them how to use a palette knife, or what it means, what the difference in atmospheric, what composition is. So language is used in all of these things. It's something we can't avoid building the students up in. It's just too core, too basic. Yes?
Speaking to that, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking out. What was I gonna say? There's still room, if I understand it correctly, you're speaking to the core of, classical education, but there's still room for teachers to have differentiated instruction, right? Is this correct? To accommodate students. They're still held accountable, but will there be differentiated instruction to help aid them if they're at different levels in their learning?
Well, the unsatisfactory answer is it depends on what you mean by that. I know what differentiated instruction is. In some cases, it means sort of a prudent application of a teaching method to a student who I know has difficulty in this way, and this helps him. In some cases, it means I actually create different lesson plans for the verbal linguistic kid, the mathematical kid, the tactile kinesthetic kid, and most classical schools do not do that, whereas any prudent teacher adapts the teaching methodology to students that she knows, and that she knows what their difficulties are and what brings them.
That's what I'm, because I believe that they've proven false the different, I'm blanking out, the different forms of learning, like if you take the test,
intelligence.
the multiple, if you test as a kinesthetic kid, you're always a kinesthetic kid,
Right.
and they're proving that's wrong.
Right.
It depends on the situation, the subject.
It was all the thing for the last 20 years. Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I do want to say this though, because you brought up the thing about language. It's a language-rich education, and a misconception always I think about classical education in the liberal arts is that it is not, that it's a humanities program, and it's not equally diligent in the realm of mathematical arts. And to say language is the root, language is core, is not to say that we don't do the other. Find a math book that doesn't have some paragraph written that uses a subject and a verb to explain to a kid how to do something. We don't get away from language anywhere, even in math. And so it's merely to put it in its place at the center, and we use it on everything. We use language in art classes, we use language in math classes, and students need to have facility with this. They need to know what somebody is saying when they're saying it. They need to be able to read something and understand the directions. And they need to be able to appreciate everything from the art in language to the play in language, because it's we embody everything in language, from the faith, our faith in the creed, to elephant jokes, and it's all good stuff. Well, I guess I should. Sorry about that last comparison.
Anything? Go ahead, Jack.
One thing I will say, Brother, I'm the school figure, but with my input with Father Gregory, he knows how I am. I'll be honest with you, I never was the smartest man in the world, and far from that. And school for me, my grades were average, but I also believe that with leadership and giving guidance to the children, they can be anything they want to be. If they have the drive, we can help them be anything they want to be. I'm fortunate to where Father Gregory can vouch for this, but I have the gift of gab. When it comes to making business deals, I do that for the church. That's something it comes naturally to me. Everybody has a unique talent, and I believe that we can bring that forth in all of the children. No one is going to get left behind as long as the parents will help put an effort in and tell the child all you have to do is try. We'll give them the support, and they will succeed. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jack. You got another question?
Please forgive me, I am not getting political.
Neither am I.
Common Core. How
Tell you another
like I'm
time.
thinking Common Core, I'm not a fan, to gosh, this is, I just realized it's being filmed. But anyway, I'm just curious how it fits in, or what the curriculum is like.
Oh, what? I'm sorry.
I'm a believer in classical education.
Yeah.
But lately, Common Core has just been drilled into our heads, and I feel like even as a teacher, it's robotic, you know. And so I'm wondering, are there mandates and so forth that, or are you allowed to get creative with your curriculum? Or are there mandates that you have to follow?
It varies by state, but in general, private schools get to set their own curriculum.
Okay.
Yeah. Parents are.
In Michigan, there's no mandatory curriculum for private schools.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes?
No, it's just since my son is going to a classical school, it's charter school under Hillsdale Initiative, and people who are seeking parents classical education, they also want teachers being able to provide classical education. Even teachers, they have like 20 years working in public school, but they don't have knowledge of how to teach classically. And I think this is also very kind of big issue, because parents, if they want classical, they want teachers to be sure that teachers know what they're doing in classical way. And it's I think also find teachers who can do it.
Well, an interesting thing that we're seeing is this. It's estimated that there are from 200 to 300,000 students in classical schools right now in the country. And several of the better performing groups, I'd say there are probably three groups you could look at that are consortiums of these schools. One being private and the two others being charter, which is public funded. But they have rather consistent performance, and they have data. What am I saying? That these, as well as all of the other one-offs, classical schools, charter and private, these the schools are growing. They're getting attention. Funders are starting to say, if you come to this town, we'll give you $70 million to start up and do 5 schools here over the next few years. You know, this sort of thing is happening around the country. A lot of students have been graduating from these schools, and they tend to do really well in college. These schools are hiring a lot of teachers, and as you say, it's not always the best training available for the teachers. A new thing, just in the last few years, is that universities are starting degree programs in classical instruction. They may have their education department, but they're starting new programs. The University of Dallas started a master's in classical education for classical teachers. Eastern University in Pennsylvania has started a master's in classical teaching program. Hillsdale has one. Grove City College has one. Baylor University in Texas has one. St. John's College has started one. Arizona State, makes sense, Arizona's right there with something like 25 classical charter schools in Phoenix. Arizona State has started a program to train those people in the pedagogy and philosophy. New St. Andrews has been around for a long time doing this, but the impact of these schools is going outside just the impact on the students and their families. It's influencing higher education. So it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a lot going on.
Other questions? All right, it's great, Bryan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all, and I hope you really look forward to hearing about your progress and seeing pictures of the building. And I want to see a picture of the little kids walking into the school on the first day.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.